Welcome to the LivBtr podcast. I'm Erica Spiegelman, addiction and wellness specialist and author, and along with me, I have my co-host, Jay Siano, a New York-based serial entrepreneur, business scaling expert, and wellness aficionado. We are here to inspire, encourage growth, and most importantly, to live better. Welcome to the LivBtr podcast. Today we have on Dr. Dave Rabin. He is an MD and PhD, a neuroscientist, a board-certified psychiatrist, health tech entrepreneur, and inventor who has been studying the impact of chronic stress in humans for over a decade. We are so excited to hear about the many hats he wears and about his new device, the Apollo. Dr. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you both.
You are absolutely inspiring because I think Jay and I, we love to be with people, spend the time with people that are helping people live better. And there's so many other things in our, I think in our society now, or just, our collective that hadn't been hadn't been a talking point for so long. And it's people like you that are raising the awareness around certain things. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's fun work, to educate people about how to heal. So
yeah, I'm in the addiction space myself. I'm an author of some books and, been having a private practice for a long time, working with treatment centers in Los Angeles and all over the country. And I know that a lot of people that I have seen through the years have, in particular, some trauma, and the trauma doesn't seem to get better with just psychotherapy. I think having psychedelic assistance and just actually doing some somatic therapy and other kinds of work can really help them heal. Could you tell us just a little bit about your background in this field and in general, what you've been doing professionally?
Sure. So I am a trauma and addiction psychiatrist. I've been practicing and been studying chronic stress because this has been something that's really interested me, which is kind of the study of resilience and, what challenges make us sick and our response to them. When does that make us sick, or when does that make life harder for us and cause illness? And when does that actually help us grow and become stronger? Because we know that challenge is also critical to overcoming, to basically growth as human beings. And if we don't face challenge, we actually don't learn stuff that's very useful to us. And so this always interested me and kind of I was always interested in meaning making effectively. How do we, because it always seemed like people who faced really hard stuff and had support afterwards were able to develop a meaning with those experiences. And I noticed this in myself intuitively, from facing challenge. And I think, many of us do, where we notice that the way we look at something has a huge impact on the way that we think about it later and what it means to us in our lives. And for instance, thinking about a challenge that we're facing at any moment, by saying, why me? What is wrong with me that I have to face this right now? Or why does this shit keep getting dumped on me? Right. Time and time again. And many of us have had those thoughts, and that why me thinking in and of itself creates a negative or punishment association with the challenge. Whereas if we turn it on its head and say, what if I could be grateful for the opportunity to face this challenge right now? Because this opportunity to face this challenge is an opportunity for me to grow as a human being, like leveling up in a video game, right? This is my opportunity to gain new skill sets, right? Most of us don't think about it that way, but when we do, just that simple shift in the meaning that we associate with that experience, growth versus punishment, completely changes the way that we interpret that experience, even down to the core of our biology and what happens to our heart rate and our breathing rate and our brain waves and how we feel. And so that always interested me a lot. And that role of meaning was never really something that was taught to us very well, I felt, growing up, or even in medical school or college. We didn't really study it. And consciousness was kind of like this thing that was nebulous and out of reach. And so I kind of went into philosophy and biology and cognitive neuroscience in college, and then started studying stem cell neurobiology and aging, diseases of aging and chronic stress, like Alzheimer's and dementia and macular degeneration in the eye in humans. And then from there, I learned about psychedelic research and seeing the challenges we were facing in mental illness at that time. Psychiatry was interesting, but it was still didn't seem like it had a full toolbox
Hmm.
of resources to actually address this growing burden of mental illness, because most of our treatments that we're taught to use as psychiatrists don't actually work in more than 50% of people, and they often have a lot of side effects. And that was discouraging. But then a good friend of mine who was in the field, Dr. Rena Paris, who was in medical school with me at the time, and this was in 2012, sent me a folder of manuscripts on the latest research going on in the psychedelic space. And I saw that these papers were being published in top tier journals, and they were really, really good science, showing that there was a huge amount of support for psychedelic medicines actually changing the way we make meaning.
Hmm.
And that led me down this journey of into treatment resistant mental illness, and how do we address those other 50-60% of people that aren't getting better with the treatments we have available.
Right. Right. I was going to say, I mean, what you're talking it. It's like the grand secret is called the reframe. Like reframing, learning how to reframe, and like you said, when I have a thought, like an anxious thought or worried thought about my kids, I have two young kids, and it's just, and it's not really, the narrative's not really based in any truth. It's just being, having young kids and having a worry. My heartbeat starts to pound. I start to feel hot. It's just, I think raising the awareness, for everybody, is that our thoughts are connected to our bodies, and our bodies are connected to our thoughts, and everything is, everything is connected. And so again, I think, when we talk about the wearable that you created, I was just wanted to pivot over there. Um, the Apollo wearable, which Jay and I have used. How did you begin to look at the market and say, like, this is something that people need? Because, like what I was just saying, the thoughts and our physical world are, so intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're what we like to say in our practices. They are intimately, our mind and bodies are intimately and irrevocably interconnected.
Yeah.
There is no separation between
Right.
the two. Um, and this is a important just thing to think about. It's really at the foundation of how we think about health, because you know even even physical health and mental health are treated differently in billing, right? And in the way
Yeah.
that they're practiced in America, in the
Yeah.
most advanced medical system in the world. And yet we still haven't fully figured out that mental and physical health are one and the same. When we're physically ill, we're still stuck in like the Cartesian dualist approach, where I think, therefore I am. My mind and my body are separate.
Yeah.
And so that actually creates a lot of issues when we're talking about treating mental illness, because mental illness is a full body disorder. It's and a lot of tension and material, for lack of a better term, gets stuck in the body. And doing work with the body physically and addressing things in the body can actually make mental health symptoms better. We know that that's true, and we know that treating mental health symptoms in many people can actually make physical health symptoms better,
Yeah.
which is all scientifically backed now. So there's should be very clear, there's no separation. And
Hmm.
so where Apollo comes in is we were doing therapy. We were working with these masters of psychotherapy, and psychotherapy works again in many people, but not in everyone, not any more than 50% in general, for the kinds of depression, PTSD disorders we're talking about. And the
Hmm.
same with the drugs. And so we're like, where do these two meet in the middle? Where, well, certain medications can increase access to uh, psychotherapy experiences that help people to heal and recover in the psychotherapy, and psychedelics kind of rise to the top there, right? Which is why there's this field of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And so we started studying that, and we also at the same time started studying heart rate variability, breath work, soothing
Hmm.
touch, soothing music, because what I was noticing in my practice in particular was that there were common themes between the way people who were feeling sick and not getting better, were experiencing, which was constant threat, fear. Their bodies were in like fear response states. Their heart rates were generally high. Their HRV, heart rate variability, was generally low. They're typically breathing fast and shallow, and they are quick to react to things they perceive threatening in the environment, which we call hypervigilance, which is very unpleasant, and it's
Yeah.
very common in people with PTSD. And that's a sign that they're constantly perceiving threat from the environment.
Hmm.
So we realized that when we brought them into the office and we were sitting with them having a nice empathic conversation, all of a sudden they feel a lot better because they feel safe around us and they trust us. And when they feel safe around us, then they remember what it feels like to feel safe in their own bodies. And then they can take that with them, but it doesn't last. And so this kind of left this theme of safety being really, really important in the way that we heal,
Mm.
especially from mental illness, and the safety of effectively like being held by another human being where you just don't have to worry about anything else, like almost like a baby, the feeling a baby gets from being held by its mother.
Yeah.
Right. And so that we thought, well, if that's the kind of safety these people need because their nervous system is saying, we're not safe, we're not safe, we're not safe in the body, and that's triggering this response in the mind, which is the racing thoughts and the flashbacks and all of that stuff. What if we just hit the body with a bunch of safety signals? What will happen? Right. And then we started studying MDMA, and that's what MDMA does. It molecularly amplifies safety signals in the emotional cortex, and that's now been shown in animal models, which is really interesting. And so we saw that, and we saw touch does that, and we saw soothing music does that, and breath work does that, and they're all doing the same thing, activating the same pathway in the emotional cortex of the brain, which tells our fear center, the amygdala, that's going boop boop boop, alarm, 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 to shut up, and everything's going to be okay right now. Not necessarily, forever, but right now everything's okay. You don't have to go, you don't have to set off the alarm bells right now. We're not under actual threat. And so that's where Apollo came in, was basically asking the question, if safety is how it works, can we put safety into a wearable and send people home with it and give people something they can use any time of day, whenever they want, whether they're trying to wake up or trying to fall asleep or trying to focus at work or trying to be on date night or socialize when you're tired or whatever. And it worked.
It's an amazing tool. I mean, I've been really just experimenting with many different things. And quite frankly, I can't get my HRV where I want it to be. And I work with a lot of athletes, and I spend my time doing a lot of physical training, really primarily for my mental health. And the side effect of all of that physical activity is getting in better shape, looking good, and feeling good. But I think, I've learned for myself that the more, basically, easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life. That's how I've summed everything up. But this thing, I still don't understand how it has effectively changed my HRV in a matter of hours. Explain, please.
Well, it's the mother holding the baby thing, right? So what improves HRV more than anything else is our bodies knowing that they're safe.
Okay.
So sleep shows us that, because when we sleep, our HRV, sleep is like the state where we have to be safe because we have to be vulnerable enough to fall asleep, safe enough to be vulnerable to fall asleep, because we're physically defenseless when we sleep. And that is how we restore HRV the most. And then second most is basically breath work and soothing touch, because those are the two ways. Breath work is how we convey safety to ourselves by saying, I'm going to take a breath right now, so I'm in control, right? I'm going to take a breath right now. I'm going to pay attention to that feeling. And biofeedback studies have shown within 90 seconds, 95% of people who are healthy will increase their HRV in a statistically significant manner within 90 seconds, 95% of people, just by doing HRV biofeedback, which means roughly 5 to 7 breaths per minute for 90 seconds. So touch is the way that we can, by self-touch, but especially from the outside, we can it sends the same signal to the body, to the emotional brain that breath does, which is basically, if I have time to pay attention to this soothing feeling right now, I can't possibly be running from a lion. Right. So then all of a sudden, amygdala shuts down because it has overwhelmingly positive input. And then that sends a signal to what's basically the anterior cingulate cortex and the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is everything that governs all the stress hormones responses in the body, the cortisol, the epinephrine, everything stress response related. And then it says, we're safe. That means you can divert all available resources back away from skeletal muscles, heart and lungs, back to reproductive system, digestive system, immune system, metabolic system, rest and recovery system, which means almost instantaneously when we're experiencing soothing touch, our heart rate slows down.
So is it the sensation of the device that is active on our skin that's actually delivering that, or how? break it down a little bit more in layman's terms, exactly what wearing this does to make us feel safe.
It gives you the same feeling of having somebody hold your hand, right? So that signal from the skin, whether
Right.
it's delivered by, I mean, it's not quite as pleasant as a handhold. It's not exact, but we figured out in the lab at the University of Pittsburgh, there are specific rhythms of touch, vibration that the body is reminded of, feel kind of like a purring cat or somebody holding your hand or giving you a hug on a bad day.
Mm-hmm.
And that instantly sends safety signals to the emotional cortex, just like your mother cuddling you as a child.
So when you
Right?
started out to create this product, did you know that was the case, or did you have a hunch that it was the case and you learned that it was as you were kind of set out on the journey and had an amazing epiphany that you were onto something?
I mean, right. I mean, it's but all of the above, right? You
Yeah.
hypothesize, you test and retest, theorize, hypothesize, test and retest, just like the scientific method. So we did I had a theory based on everything we learned in our training, in our psychotherapy training and in doctor training, that safety was really, really important for the patients. It makes a huge difference for their recovery. I saw that in my own patients. We were all musicians, and so we naturally understood the power of music and vibration to impact the body from our own experience playing it and listening to it for our whole lives. And then I dove into the literature, with my team, and we looked at, what evidence is there for this already working. And then as you start to see, there's actually people who have had these ideas before but never completely finished answering the questions. You start to understand that we have a framework for this. Then you put together the hypothesis and you test it. And by the time we got to the hypothesis level, we had a pretty good feeling that what we were testing was going to work, because a lot of other people had done something similar before, but you never know for sure. And you never know how well it's going to work or how reproducible it's going to be. And I think what's really interesting about Apollo is how reproducible it is, in that we get like a 95% hit rate with people, where if you play an Apollo vibe at any given time, because you want to feel a certain way and you play that there's a 95% chance it's going to get you to where you want to go, closer than you were when you started. And that's really interesting, meaning there's a lot of rhythms that we have in common as human beings that we're much more in common than we are different, right? That's the whole ultimate premise of the work, is how do you get a 95% hit rate? Well, you make an assumption, that the hypothesis that we are as humans much, much, much more in common than we are different. And then how do we tap into those similarities, right? Why does most human beings in the face of the earth like house music more than any other kind of music?
Do they?
Yeah, it's the most popular form of music.
It's global, right? Yeah, exactly.
I just thought I liked to dance, so yeah.
Which is exactly why Drake, put out a house album to capture that global market.
And Beyonce, right?
That last one.
So real quickly though, just to stay on the musical side of things, is it possible to achieve similar through music? And I mean, based on that comment about house music, like, is that essentially why house music is so popular? It's a rhythm that makes us feel safe.
Yeah, I mean, so the house music rhythm, in case you've never heard this before, is actually thought to be very, very close to the rhythm of the placental heartbeat.
Yeah,
makes sense,
right?
Yeah,
I found that the more MDMA that I would take and listen to house music, I felt like I was back in the womb. So makes sense.
Well, that's why it increases the joy that you feel when you're
exactly. But we digress.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think in some ways music is music is the OG vibration, psychedelic vibration technology, right? Yeah. Think about the role that music has played in human history. Yeah. It started out with probably singing to communicate stuff, because we always remember stuff better in song. Then it probably went to very quickly like drum circles, right? And tribal gatherings where people are playing music communally together to tell stories and pass on oral history. And then of course those lead into, music ceremonies. Music ceremonies were often thought to be ceremonies where group communitas was accessed, right? There was actually like a melding of the group mind together, which is effectively using music to induce an altered state of consciousness, of collective consciousness, right? And communion with the earth. which is really fascinating. And then, going from there into music plus plant medicines and, all of these things that now have evolved into what we're now doing in the clinic, which is we give people a very specific soundtrack with their ketamine assisted therapy. Right. And they have this music guided experience. And so that's been around for a really long time. And we know that works. And we know that it's basically limitless what we can create with the audible frequencies that we hear as music. And so I think what's really exciting is about, and what Apollo is kind of what we're bringing to the table with Apollo is, if you can think about all the magical stuff that we've done with music over the last thousands of years, now think about what we can do when we create the ability to create touch experiences with vibration that is music, right? If you think about touch as music, which is what Apollo is, it's wearable music for your body that is composed for your skin instead of your ears. It's just a different frequency range, but you're able to access the same kinds of experiences, and in some cases deeper and even different, more immersive experiences, because it's through a sensory organ of our bodies that's so sensual and intimate. And something that so many of us are lacking. When you start studying touch, you realize you start to become immediately aware of how little touch we have in Western culture and how much we actually benefit from it.
Yeah, it's also just the way that music and vibration and all this impact emotion. Like, I feel like, a lot of the times, a lot of us have gone through periods where we distract ourselves from emotion, and, and that's with addiction and, different substance use disorders. But I think in general, I know grown people in my family, let's just say, that don't have the emotional intelligence, don't access their, I think, true emotion, because they've learned to just distract and put walls up. And how that too, I think, I know I've healed my life through music. Jay and I have talked about this on our show before. He's also healed through music. Both him and I have that in common. And I think a lot of people do use music to feel something, because they can't feel it and they're not safe enough to feel it in other parts of their lives. So that too, I think, is something to encourage, is that, like, the emotional awareness. I think, do people become, you think, more emotionally inclined to, like, sit in their feelings? Like, if you start wearing something like this, you start crying or have a reaction of sadness, or, right? I mean, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, part of the disease that we face in society across the board is that people don't feel safe enough to feel.
Right.
But we are creatures of feeling.
Yeah.
Right? We're emotional animals. And to shun the thing that is our superpower is like a recipe for self-hatred. Do you know what I mean? Like, we really need to embrace feeling. And because feeling is, like, again, it's like the essence of humanity. It's what makes things most rich and fun and exciting. That's why we go watch movies that are emotional, right? Because they allow us to invoke feeling in a safe environment that is behind a screen or in front of a screen. It's not actually part of our lives. Like, we can experience extremes without feeling actually threatened. Right.
Well, how do you change the narrative? Like, if you're somebody that is grown up with a family, or the familial, like, narrative of, like, little boys shouldn't cry, or, whatever the narrative was that's unhealthy, right? And I think that there's so many messages to all of us in society not to feel. Whether you're a woman, you have your own message. A man, how do we begin not only to wear these devices, use music, have all these tools, but how do we begin to teach people to shift the narrative, to shift our thought habits, to shift our thoughts in general, so that this is a sustainable change, not just something that, okay, I could feel in this hour, but what do I do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that we need to change the narrative, right? That's the first thing, is we need to start changing the way we talk about emotions. Yeah. And the first step is to remind everybody, even ourselves, especially ourselves, that we're safe enough to feel our own emotions. And that when we feel our emotions, rather than reject them, that they actually can be expressed in healthy ways. Like anger, for instance, if we let it out in healthy ways, can be one of our best sources of energy and motivation to do anything. It's a very powerful reaction to an emotion, to fear. It's very powerful. But many of us reject being angry because we've been taught that being angry is not okay. And, young boys often get taught that we're not supposed to be sensitive because it's not masculine. And that rejection of those parts of ourselves creates in some ways like a fractured self, or a part of ourself that we reject, or that we don't allow to be part of the family or the whole.
Yeah.
And so tools like Apollo and breathwork and yoga and, all of meditation, mindfulness, all of these things we talk about are ways that help us process these separations that we are aware of, and process and effectively achieve balance. Right. The goal is health means balance. So how do we move towards a more balanced life, so that when stress comes, we have all the tools we need to respond to it quickly and adapt to it and learn from it and move on to the next thing, and we don't get stuck. Right. And so tools like Apollo and the breath work and all these techniques are important because they all create an ecosystem that promotes adaptation. And adaptation is the ability to respond to stress and to adapt to change quickly and to bounce back quickly. And so it creates, in doing that, we build resilience by creating safe space to feel our emotions, because there are always going to be more emotions. And if we don't have a safe space, then more stress is going to come, and we're going to have more emotions, and then we're going to get overwhelmed really easily, and then we're going to crash or decompensate, and we see that all the time. And so what we really need to do to become the best adapters we can is learn how to feel first, and then that helps us to adapt to stress much better, and it builds effectively like emotional intelligence and emotional resilience. That's what we're really struggling with as a society right now, most of all.
So a couple of things. So one, I lost my mother after college, and as a result of that, just continued to party and drink more and more to numb the trauma. And many, many years later, I removed all the things and started to really sit with myself and, do the work. And it's been an amazing journey for myself. And along the way, I had panic attacks, things that I could never understand, and certain situations would trigger those panic attacks. And I would want to drink to like hope that I wouldn't feel that way. And it was a little bit of a safety blanket for me, which kept that cycle going. And I would always say that, I discovered Jack Johnson in those years, and it became my musical Xanax, where I was just like, holy shit. Like, if I'm starting to feel a certain way, like I put on Jack Johnson and everything melts away. It's amazing.
Yep.
And
I had a Jack Johnson music prescription days.
Did you really?
Yeah. In college.
Yeah. I mean, just really phenomenal. But what I want to ask selfishly, I help emerging brands scale physical and digital brands. Boutique fitness, wellness is really, an area that I specialize in. And we keep talking about mindfulness and breath work and yoga. I work with some of the best mindfulness, breath work, and yoga concepts in the country, and then concepts that are beyond that. And I'm starting to really get obsessed with contrast therapy of saunas and cold baths, ice plunges, and things of that nature. Are you doing anything in that space with hot and cold? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you asked. We were just spent a bunch of time with one of our good friends, Laura Fullerton, who runs Monk, which is a upcoming and much more affordable home cold plunge experience. And, I think hot cold is really interesting because it's putting, it's thinking about resilience for a moment, right?
Correct. Yeah.
What is resilience? Resilience is like discomfort tolerance. Right? It's discomfort tolerance. When we are impulsive, when we are acting out, when we're compulsive and making decisions that are not necessarily serving us, but they're like going down old habits, like the Netflix and the Haagen-Dazs, when we're trying to stay healthy and cope in healthier ways with stress, that is discomfort intolerance.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we're really building, and that's a lack of resilience. And we're really trying to build is resilience, which is discomfort tolerance. So thinking about that, hot cold is really interesting because in addition to all of the physiological things that it's doing mentally, it's building discomfort tolerance by putting you into an objectively very, very uncomfortable situation, like ice cold water for 3 minutes or what have you. And then you have to mentally bring yourself, it's not going to kill you. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to cause you any significant problems, but you have to bring yourself into the mental level that you can tolerate that for.
I love it.
Right.
I'm obsessed. It's
It,
so
it, can-
amazing.
and it's really hard, but it's really like when you think about it, it's doing that hard stuff in safe space.
Right.
That is what promotes healing the most. Right. How do you do the hard stuff safely?
Yeah.
And that's what's going to promote healing the most. And that's actually kind of how Apollo works. It's like a form of exposure therapy. You wear it with you during your day-to-day, not just when you're asleep, but during your day-to-day, you have it on. And then you realize that things that used to set you off and make you feel alarmed or threatened now aren't, because you have the safety, the noise canceling of the Apollo on your body, that kind of like noise cancels for your body when you're in situations during your day-to-day, which is how exposure therapy works. And that really influenced the way that we developed the technology, which is really interesting. So hot and cold and Apollo have a lot in common in that resilience building way. And you can see that because as you use them, your HRV goes up quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I've achieved, like I said, a much quicker HRV boost from the Apollo than even the contrast therapy. So
it's the only wearable that can boost your HRV in a statistically significant manner within as little as 2 minutes. That is, I mean, at all, but in as little as 2 minutes, we've seen in our studies, because touch is just that quick. It's so cool.
It is cool. What company was it that you mentioned? Monk.
Yeah, Discover Monk.
I want to check that out.
It's all just so there's so many layers to this. Like it's just it's amazing that, I think, Jay, when we talk about like how, well, I want to hear first of all about how we discover like for you, for instance, this cold plunging. Like for me, I have like no interest in it. I don't know. I mean, unless it's longevity, great. Yes, I would do something if it guarantees me to live longer, right? But Robin Sharma, when we had him on, said that taking a hot bath was just as effective. I prefer,
Yeah, I think, my experience, experience with it has been exactly what Dr. Dave is saying. It's, I'm always on a path to build my resilience, right? So I seek discomfort because I get punched in the face several times a day. That's just what I do. I'm an entrepreneur. So if I can, stay as calm, cool, and collected in those situations, and tools like an ice bath, I mean, have helped me tremendously. And I, again, just kind of dealing with anxiety in the past, for some reason, just implementing these things in my life, like there's no anxiety. And for me, it's been also the removal of alcohol is the other thing, because I'd feel good or okay while I was drinking. And then after I was drinking, I would get anxious. And it was that same continuous loop that I never really identified until I removed it all. Yeah. And I'm like, holy shit, I don't have anxiety. Like it's a whole different world.
That's the most common side effect of alcohol. Is that anxiety afterwards.
Yeah. Well,
anxiety.
Yeah. It eats away at your nervous system, basically.
So when we're talking about you guys are obviously a lot more familiar with psychotherapy and things of that nature. You mentioned ketamine. Is that also microdosing? Is that, does that fall under the same umbrella? What do you work with, doctor? What exactly are you guys doing?
So microdosing is something that is we were just talking to Jim Fadiman, who Dr. Jim Fadiman is the psychologist who really popularized the term microdosing several decades ago, and he was just over spending some time with us at the house, and we had a lecture with him yesterday. And microdosing is a term that is drug agnostic. It can apply to lots of different medicines, and it really is about subthreshold or sub-perceptual. Like you don't actually notice that there's anything different when you've taken it. Although it's, sometimes people notice, it's really hard not to notice anything, but the idea is you barely notice anything, or you notice nothing when you take it on the daily basis. But over the course of 3 months of microdosing at a regular interval, which would be like, according to the Fadiman protocol, would be, one dose every one day on, 3 days off, and you switch. So then there's, 1 day on, 2 days off, and then you dose again every 3 days. So that's for 3 months. So that would be, something you could do with psilocybin or small doses of LSD or other things. But in general, there's it's a complex area because we don't have a lot of studies of it, and yet there are some that have come out that are worth reading, that your Nature reports about large population studies of microdosers that are very interesting. But those are some of the only studies we have available, and we don't have a lot of information about it. But ketamine is primarily what we do in our practice, which is a macro dose, which is we do have a lot of evidence for treatment with of mental illness like depression and PTSD, using full doses of ketamine, which the goal is, or other psychedelic medicine like MDMA, which is not legal for use in the office yet. But these full doses induce a peak state, and that peak state is a state where your consciousness is substantially altered and your perception is substantially altered, and you're aware that it's altered. And it's altered in a way that kind of, in a lot of ways, just quiets the voices in our mind that have been telling, or the story in our mind that has been running for a long time, and helps us to just kind of step into our observer mind, which is just listening, not having to do anything, not having to think anything, just listening and observing ourselves and the world around us. And just that simple experience of having quiet mind can be tremendously therapeutic for people. And there's lots of other stuff that happens, but that's kind of the gist.
Yeah, no, that's great to explain to everybody. I mean, it's a continuum, right? Because there's some people out there. I mean, now it's like everyone's talking about microdosing, and I could go on about, people I know that, that I think sometimes it really is. I mean, I know this, very helpful for people dealing with depression, and, like, on a scale, if you're having real, mental health issues and just problems with anxiety, of course, I think I personally think we should just have an open heart and open mind for everything, and see if it helps. Why not? But then there's also, I think, just everyday people kind of throwing it around out there irresponsibly a little bit with, just, as this always happens, I think, with the latest fads and trends. Like, what can you just say to the audience if they're thinking about microdosing or using psilocybin or something like this out there? Do you think it's okay for everybody, or would you say if there has to be an ailment of some kind?
I mean, it doesn't have to be an ailment, and nobody can really restrict that right now, but but it's definitely not for everybody. Psychedelic medicines do have risk, and they need to be used very thoughtfully and very intentionally. For anybody who is interested in using these medicines and need guidance, I highly recommend check out psychedelic.support has a wonderful harm reduction guide. The Psychedelic Report, which is our show, the news show. It's the first psychedelic news show that comes out every week. We have episodes on microdosing and understanding microdosing so you can do it safely. And we talk a lot about safety. And starting at episode 1, the conversation is really of the Psychedelic Report is really about, what do you do when you look under the hood of your consciousness, right? Because that's really what's happening when we take a psychedelic medicine. And what psychedelic substances are mind revealing. So they show parts of our minds to us. And when we don't know what is under there, like you wouldn't go start to work on your car when your car breaks down or your car's not running the way you want to. You wouldn't just pop open your hood and start tinkering around in there without having an expert with you showing you what to do, unless you knew what to do. And, we need to treat ourselves and our brains and our consciousness with the same respect that we would treat our vehicle, and actually have somebody ideally show us how to work within that space. And so for most people, I would say in general, it's recommended that you have these experiences with somebody who knows what they're doing, and somebody that you feel safe around that can help you navigate and whatever comes up during those experiences. Doesn't need to be necessarily somebody with my level of training, which could be hard to find, but it does need to be somebody who you trust, who you feel safe around, that can help you unpack and navigate those experiences. And we recommend anybody who does any psychedelic experiences as a therapist that you talk to. But in general, if you have bipolar disorder, if you have psychotic disorder, delusional disorder, or personality disorder, we absolutely do not recommend you taking these medicines.
Or a history of it, because it could just tip you over in a way that is not great. Yeah. Well, no, I'm so happy, and I'm grateful that you shared those comments, because I just think it's good for everybody to, it's like if it becomes something normalized in just social conversation, and I got this online, or I got this online, it's like, I wouldn't trust what you get online, and just to do it in a responsible way is great
Yeah.
advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're really like,
Yeah.
tinkering with the machinery,
Yeah.
and again, psychedelic medicines are mind revealing. They expand awareness, and they expand awareness in non-specific ways. So
Right.
that means that they can increase awareness of unpleasant things, and they can increase awareness of pleasant things.
Yeah.
And just because something's unpleasant doesn't mean it's bad, and doesn't mean we shouldn't feel it,
Right.
but it does mean we should be prepared
Yeah.
for it, and we should be
Well, have the
prepared.
tool. Yeah.
Right. So we know how to have the tools, so we know how to deal with it. And so that's also a big part of why we came out with Apollo, which is interesting, is it's kind of a tool that people can take into the psychedelic experiences. And even though, not everybody can find a therapist, at least they can have something on their body that reminds your body how to be calm and how to have agency and to take control of your attention when you're in those experiences. And that
Yeah.
can be really challenging
Yeah.
when you haven't learned the techniques that we're talking about here.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So last question, I just wanted to ask you what you do to live better in your own personal life. If you could just share, like, is there anything that you do in terms of self-care day to day that?
Yeah, so I use Apollo a lot. I
Mhm.
have a very regular rhythm throughout my day. I did not always have that in my life. And I think when I didn't have a regular rhythm of like when I was working every day and when I was like doing focus tasks versus meetings versus winding down and sleeping and
Mhm.
doing self-care stuff, when I didn't have that rhythm, my life was a lot crazier. And it's always a challenge being as busy as I am, and that we are as, entrepreneurs, to keep
Yeah.
up that rhythm, because sometimes stuff does get in the way. But that's where the resilience techniques really come in, and
Mhm.
making sure that I'm going to bed roughly around the same time every night, even, within an hour or so, and waking up roughly around the same time every morning is really helpful. I
Mhm.
use Apollo to really maintain that rhythm for me, because I tend to be a night person. And if I forget to wind down by a certain time, I'll just be up till like 2 or 3 a.m. It's going to
Yeah.
totally mess up my day the next day. So that's a big part of it. And I think moving, number one, is absolutely critical. Have to
Mhm.
move.
Mhm.
I try to bike a lot. Um, I do some hot cold plunge. But moving in particular is really important. And also just getting a lot of time in nature,
Yeah.
ideally moving in nature.
Yes.
Um, and I do a lot of breath work. Goes without saying, breathing, and just, you don't have to call it breath work, because it's not work. It's just
Mhm.
breathing
Mhm.
intentionally,
Yeah.
right? It's
Mhm.
fun.
Mhm.
It's fun, and it's breathing intentionally, meaning that our bodies can do it on all the time on their own. But when we actually put our minds to
Yeah.
breathing,
Yeah.
all of a sudden we take control, right? And that is one of the single most important skills and our like tools in our toolbox that we can have access to anytime. And the sooner that we start learning and practicing to doing that, especially when we're not in a situation of stress, the
Yeah.
better we get at it. And it becomes, one of those essential things you can always take with you. And it
It's
always makes you healthier to do.
Yeah, it's like building a muscle. But even when you just said breathing, I took a deep breath, and I could literally feel my nervous system just calm.
Yeah.
And it's super important. Like you said, it's also creating those pathways, and we only could create pathways through repetition, and that's why routines are important. Everything that you just talked about. So, thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Dave.
It's
We
my
are,
pleasure.
yeah, thrilled to so happy we got a chance to experience Apollo and talk to you about it and about all the wonderful things you're doing. So we hope to keep in touch and keep up with you in the future.
Likewise.
Yeah,
Thank you again.
thank you.